What is up, y'all? Welcome back to our Fish the Moment live stream. Today, we have a really special episode for you guys. We got John, Soukup in the house tonight, going to be battling it out with Randy about forward-facing sonar, Livescope, all kinds of stuff. We're going to be picking his brain about some of his recent tournament finishes. He's been one of the hottest anglers in the country, so we're going to talk about that as well. And really just give you guys really good overview of not only how to use Livescope potentially to catch fish in tournaments, the limitations of it, and get a different perspective than what you may hear from me and Randy on the stream. So I think there's a lot of great info that's going to be shared tonight. So we're excited. John, thanks for joining us tonight.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I'm glad to join Randy. Hopefully he doesn't have his gloves off. Don't hit too hard.
I think we'll be all good. I'll be the moderator over here, and then if I'm not able to do it, then chat. You guys need to help me out over here. So hopefully we can keep these two at bay, but I think we'll be good. So before we get into all that, a couple things I have to do, all our housekeeping at the beginning here. First up, I want to give a shout out to our two podcast sponsors. First, Bridgford Foods. They have the best beef jerky in the industry. If you guys need a great snack on the lake, get some Bridgford beef jerky. I ate a whole pack today. I actually went fishing with Rick Clun today, which was pretty fun. We were out on Table Rock Lake, and we both ate a pack of beef jerky. Rick liked it. It's Rick Clun approved. I don't know if that means anything to you guys, but that's could be helpful. And every single week we do a giveaway for a full case of Bridgford beef jerky. And I see Seymour Bass over here, who won last week. He's like, no kidding, you get a full 12 packs of beef jerky. Seriously, we give away 12 packs of beef jerky to one of the commenters every single week on the live stream, thanks to Bridgford. And last week we asked what you guys felt like the most impactful thing you learned from our last live stream was. We talked about how to target different sections of the lake to find bigger fish for tournaments. And Ryan Varner, he had a great comment and he won this past week's giveaway. It's the key to unlocking a better success in tournament fishing is identifying the part of the lake where the bigger fish tend to congregate. I'm going to focus on that during my tournament season in 2022. Thanks. So Ryan, thanks for the great comment, and you won our case of beef jerky this week. So send us an email at info@fishthemoment.com to get that case of beef jerky. Again, that's Ryan Varner, and thanks for supporting the podcast and listening to it. Our other sponsor is the Bass Tank, which is great because John is right here to do a little bit of spiel for it. You guys know Bass Tank does all my sonar installation, and John is one of the keys behind that. He was when he reached out to me for the sponsorship. So, John, I kind of want to head off to you to let you kind of talk about the Bass Tank and what you guys do over there in Tulsa.
Yeah, we'll make it real quick. Listen, the Bass Tank was started in 2018 when I was fishing the Forest Wood Cup, and I actually broke down in the Forest Wood Cup. Brand new boat, brand new electronics. And it's not – I've only fished one Forest Wood Cup, and I was broke down on day one and day two. And so that's what sprung the idea with Scott Palmer, my partner, being an engineer. No matter if you believe in using Livescope or don't, we're not just a Livescope company. Now, we also, are pioneers in that. But, no matter what, you have accessories on your boat that need to be wired and powered correctly. You got batteries that need to make sure the boat's starting. And those are the things that in-house in the shop that we take care of. We can rig your boat from front to back, whatever you're needing. And we also ship nationwide. Any of your electronics, your trolling motors, power poles, any of those kind of accessories. We have financing available if you need it, and we got a handy website. So if you're a night worker, you can get on the website. You don't have to, but we also provide tech support to all our customers. Listen, we're fishermen from the beginning to the end. All of us are fishermen. So one of the most important things that I think that need for electronics is not getting lost in the fact that everything is the greatest product out there. And that's all you'll read if you ever go on any guidelines. And that's not necessarily the truth for each individual person. So as fishermen, we'd like to talk to you and qualify you and find out what kind of boat you're using, what kind of waters you fish, what kind of fish you're targeting. Are you a tournament fisher? Are you just fun fishing? Do you have grandchildren that you're trying to help? And that way we can get you in the right product for the right price within your budget, not try to upsell you on a bunch of technology that you're actually not going to need. So if that's something that you need, please give us a call, and we'd like to help you guys out.
Good deal. And we hear a lot of great stuff, John, from all of our viewers from the Bass Tank. You guys have great customer service, emailing people, talking to them on the phone. I've got on the phone with Darren, who does some of the install stuff, actually, with some of my subscribers. So we try to give you guys the best possible service we can, whether it's me or someone who's, really knowledgeable about fishing. We'll get all of your questions answered with the Bass Tank. And again, it's a fisherman-driven company. Half the team fishes crappie trail, crappie tournaments. John's on the NPFL and fishing the Bassmaster Opens, successful in that realm. So obviously a lot of experience there. So it's not just guys who put the electronics in the boats. They actually know how to use them as well, which is really helpful. Good deal. Well, speaking of recent tournaments, John, before we get into the brawl, the Livescope brawl, I wanted to talk a little bit about your recent tournament success on Grand Lake during the Bassmaster Open. You were leading after 2 days, fell a little bit short on the last day, but you've been just absolutely tearing it up this year. And one thing that I wanted to get pick your brain about, and I think this is really helpful for a lot of the viewers here, is how you've been utilizing Livescope and forward-facing sonar in your tournaments versus how you haven't been. Because I've talked to you, I know kind of what you've been doing in the tournaments, and I know some tournaments have been extremely useful, and some tournaments you haven't used it as much. So maybe explaining like your prep for Grand or whatever it is, how are you using your Livescope versus just doing regular fishing styles to be so successful this year?
Yeah. So, Johnny, I'm going to tell you first, before I even answer any of that stuff, I can't tell you how big a fan I am of Fish the Moment, just myself. I know we've talked about, I never actually get to tell you, but like getting in touch with you, like there was guys at the Bass Tank were like, man, you got to talk to Jonny. And I was like, who's Jonny? And then I started remembering, oh yeah, the kid with all the videos and stuff back, 3 or 4 years ago. So it's kind of an exciting opportunity to actually be on here and talk to you about this stuff. But back to your question. So I'm going to throw a little thing out there, you guys. I fished the NPFL 2 weeks or so prior to the Bass Open. And as my season, I don't know if Randy's ever had this experience, but, I won a couple events early in the season. And then the rest of the season, it was just kind of okay. I did cash checks, but I never felt like I was getting engaged to potentially win a tournament. I just felt like I was just succeeding, but I never had an opportunity to actually win another event. And I felt like I was getting disconnected with something. So I'm gonna still like the intuitive angling and then like the fish the moment concepts, and I felt like I was needing that back in my life. So I decided to fish the Bassmaster Open. I hadn't fished any earlier in the year for conflict reasons and stuff like that. But I forced myself not to practice on the Open event. I did go up there on Tuesday and I did what I consider like a ride around, and I made a few casts when things were. The water had changed. Water had come up. Some things had gotten dirty. It was a different waterway. The bait were acting different than they were when we were there. So there was some adjustments. But I felt like I was doing too much spot fishing on Grand, because I knew it. I was familiar with it. And I needed to make myself a little uncomfortable. And I needed to work through that during a tournament scenario, not on practice. It seems like I can catch them. Everybody can catch them in practice. Something about that tournament, it's different, man. It's that pressure, that all the boats going by, it's just a different world. You can't ever say, well, I would have done this if I was in the tournament, or I would have done that, or if I was on, or you can't go fish the same lake as the tournament guys and catch 20 pounds like I would have won it. Well, not really, because you didn't have that tournament pressure. Like I wanted that pressure on me, and then I wanted to reconnect with that part of me that I know that I needed. And so that's why I actually fished the Open, which I feel like may explain some of the reasons why I made some of the decisions that I made.
And before you move on there, one thing we talked about last week, which is super interesting, is the fact that Randy in the Bassmaster or the Toyota Series Championship, he spun his his prop shaft bent, so he couldn't actually fish the areas he practiced in, and he just went fishing. He fished the moment. Literally, what the channel name is, Fish the Moment. Just went out there and went out and fished, and he finished tied for 10th in a 200 boat championship without ever practicing on any of the spots he fished. You did kind of the same thing. I know for the NPFL tournament, you had some days of practice, and you didn't do as well, and then the days you just go out and fish, you caught them. And I feel like now with fishing, the more I've seen it, I guess, and I want to get your opinion on this, both Randy and John, I feel like guys are getting so good at actually fishing and finding fish that all of those fish in practice get beat up. All the obvious spots, all the good spots, all the decent spots, they're getting so beat up by other anglers, and everyone's rotating the same stuff all the time. And there's something about finding a pattern during an actual fishing day and developing something that maybe just happened that day that can really set you apart in a tournament setting versus something that you found in practice 3 days before? Because as you guys know, things develop over the course of a week, over the course of day to day. New fish move in, new patterns develop, and by fishing the moment, I think that both of you guys were able to find something that maybe didn't exist 2 days before in practice, and fish that weren't getting 100% beat up. Would you agree with that? Not agree with that? What do you guys think on that? And I'll start with John, I guess, on that one.
Okay. Yeah, no, I agree 100%. Not only that, but like I got what I call the 90% rules in bass. Okay, everything you say is a fact is really just 90% a fact. Like there's always the 10% outliners that will make you look stupid. Now the problem is when those 10% outliners, like that's what happens most of the day, and you're like, I promise this is how it's supposed to work. But for the most part, when we're talking in general, we're also talking about seasonal patterns and things like that too. So like the fall fishing in general as well breaks up the fish just because of what's going on in the environment beyond the fishing pressure. But yes, with the opens fishing pressure, absolutely. I think that I have learned that you win the tournament a lot of times, man, a lot of times in practice, not with the pattern or the spot that you found, but by understanding the movement of the fish and what they're actually doing. And then if you cannot figure them out perfect, but then collide with them on the tournament and actually figure out how to catch the giants, that is one of the things that when I have one this year, I've been able to do is I found a large population of fish either in an area or with a pattern. And instead of beating on them in practice and opening that up, I found the little present, but I didn't open it up in practice. I just recognized what it was. Then I went and eliminated, spent the rest of my time eliminating. And that way, when tournament came, I knew, okay, that little box is really the deal. Now let's open it up during the tournament day and see what's inside. And then it's like, oh, look, there's a 5-pounder. Oh, look, there's another 5-pounder. And if it doesn't always work, 90% rule, but if you can actually learn to practice, it makes you uncomfortable. 100% everything I'm saying makes you uncomfortable until you've done it and had that success. But once you have that success with it, this may not work, let's say, with a spawning tournament or something like that when they're on beds or something like this. There's rules that would times that would go against. But I think once you get comfortable with being uncomfortable and expanding on that, just like you said, during the tournament, I think that's when you have the most success winning a tournament. Maybe not necessarily always just cash and check, but for winning, I think that's something nowadays you have to have is that, exposing that pattern in the tournament.
Good stuff right there. Do you agree with that, Randy, or anything to add?
Yeah, to me, fishing pressure, it has as big or bigger effect on the bass movement and personality as like a bad cold front. I think they react the same way as far as, just putting those fish in a negative feeding mood. But one thing I'll say about John's season this year, I mean, to win 2 tournaments and to be leading the Bassmaster Open in one season, I don't think a lot of people grasp how phenomenal that is, because to win tournaments, you basically have to have like the fishing experience of a lifetime. You have to have everything fall into place. You got to be at the right place at the right time with the right technique. You got to have the controlled and the uncontrolled variables all fall your way. So I just wanted to say that right off the bat, John, to the last year, that's phenomenal accomplishment, because I know what it takes. And winning tournaments is difficult. It's so hard to do in today's environment with that. But a lot of it like that, it's just like what John was saying. The ideal scenario in a tournament situation is to find something that's unfolding that day, the day that you're on the water. And these things change, not day by day, but hour to hour. They change with sunlight, different sunlight level intensities. They change with the angle of the sun. They change with the wind direction, the wind speed. It's constantly moving, and it's a dynamic thing that's constantly changing. And for me, when I look back at all the tournaments that I've either done well in or won over my career, it's because something that you figured out and found out the day that you were on the water, and you were able to take that, run with it, and just exploit that pattern or area or whatever it may be. So that's why bass fishing is the most complicated sport on the planet. Nobody knows how to compete.
It's the simplest and most complicated.
So this is a tangent again, but whenever I talk to John and to Randy, I always go off on tangents because you guys have such great information to share, especially on the tournament angle. This is a question I've always asked people, and I think it's funny to get the answer, but how many times have you guys caught a 20-pound limit in practice for a tournament, then gone back and caught 20 pounds doing the exact same thing with the same bait in the same area the next day of the tournament or in the tournament? How often does that happen for you guys? And I'll start with John there.
Man, I would say never. And if I did have that experience, now I've had some bites and I've won, but I sure didn't catch them the day before. I mean, I had hooks rolled. I can think back to a tournament that I won with 19 pounds in the fall on a local tournament, but 19 pounds when second place was 14. So that was like a big blown out event. And the day before, I was throwing a chatterbait on schooled up bait that was out in the middle. You know, they were doing their fall thing where you'd rattle trap, but I was doing a chatterbait a certain way, and I had my hook rolled. I mean, they would annihilate it, and with the hook rolled, I'd reel it back in like 40 feet to the boat. They'd circle around the boat, you know, and I'm like, I swear I got this thing hooked. And then, of course, he'd come off because there was no hook there. And it was like, oh, my God, that is a big fish. And it happened in 3 different spots. The next day I went back early in the morning. The bait weren't up, so they were kind of pushed the rock still. It was cold fall morning. So those fish had actually pulled to the rock where it was, you know, where the warmth was at, and the bait weren't up yet. And I ended up catching 3 5-pounders like within about 15, 20 yards of where I'd had that bite before. And I swear that was that fish that was out in the middle feeding, but I caught him on the rock, which was like there was only one rock the next day. And so I've had those things, but to actually catch them, hook them, and come back the next day, I honestly, I can't even think of a time. So
it's mainly you figure out something, kind of the mood or the movement of the fish like you talked about. I think a lot of guys get messed up with that is they catch them the exact way in practice and they try to come back the next day and catch them the exact same way in the same spots with the same baits. And most of the time it doesn't work like that because I'm sure you caught him maybe on a different in a different water column, a different approach, retrieve, even in that example you gave. So that's really interesting. What about you, Randy?
I've had it go both ways. First of all, you know, if you're catching 20 pounds in practice, you're not doing something right because you should never stay in an area long enough to catch 20 pounds in practice. And the times that I've caught big bags in practice has become, it's just because it's just completely random. I'll give 2 examples of both scenarios. I was practicing for an FLW tournament at Beaver Lake. It was actually, I think, the tournament that Jason Christie won on the A-Rig down there. The first day of practice, I was up the river throwing the Megabass S-Crank square bill on rocky banks, and it was a cloudy, windy day. The water was dirty up there because they'd had some recent runoff up the river, and I caught a 5-fish limit that day that would have weighed about 24 pounds, which is massive on Beaver Lake. I couldn't believe it. I was like, it was so surreal, but I'd catch one, and then I'd troll up another 75 yards before making another cast, and then catch another one, and then idle up quarter mile and catch another one. And it was so random. It wasn't like I was just pounding on them. And the first day of the tournament, I ran back up there, and the water had cleared off. You know, the water in that upper river cleans real quick, and it went from like 6 inches of visibility to like 1.5 feet, almost 2 foot of visibility. Those fish were gone. So that's one example there. But I have had the opposite. I was fishing an FLW tournament on the Mississippi River out of St. Louis, out of Memphis one year. And I found this one backwater a long way from the takeoff. And the last day of practice, I went in there. And in 45 minutes, I shook off like 20 fish flipping willows with a big jig. And you could tell they were big ones. If I'd have sat on them, it'd have been 20 pounds. And in the tournament, I went back there every day, and I caught between 17 to 21 pounds the first 15 or 20 minutes of the day. Like every willow tree'd have a big one in it. So in that situation, yeah, it was the same in practice. But most of the time, you have some type of environmental weather condition changes, fishing pressure, whatever, and those fish just don't hang out there for day after day after day very often.
Deal. That's why we got to fish the moment, guys. Got to throw that in there. Okay, John. So we're going to get into the whole discussion of Randy versus John on the Livescope stuff. So for those who are here for that, just give us a second. I want to kind of pick John's brain on some juice. We got John in here, and he's been red hot this year. So I'm trying to get as much info out of his brain in the next 10 minutes as I can. So John, Next question for you. This is the big question. On Grand, you're leading the open after 2 days. How many fish did you see on Livescope or use Livescope to catch? Like where you actually saw them bite your bait with Livescope on Grand
Yeah,
Lake?
zero.
Exact zero.
Yeah, zero.
So was
yeah,
Livescope helpful though?
So okay, yeah. So here's there's the big. I call it the big three, right? There's three things that you can use any technology, whether it's Livescope or whether it's your side imaging, down imaging, 2D, whether it's even your flasher. There's three main things that you're doing. So, but since we're talking about Livescope here, we'll talk about Livescope, right? Everybody knows Livescope to be kind of like what we use it for in the wintertime. Majority of the time is where we're actually targeting an individual fish with an individual lure. I'm on the trolling motor. I'm literally what we call chasing that fish down, following it, and using that as like my eyes underwater to get in front of a fish that you otherwise would never even knew existed, right? Or picking a fish out of a brush pile and things like that. And that is, the toppest, highest level of the ability with that, because you got boat control and wind and all the different things that go in it. It's like stalking a deer, if you will, So that's what a lot of people think when you hear live scoping, but that's not what I use it majority of the time for, honestly. The second factor that you use it for is just boat positioning. Let's say you got a rock pile or a brush pile, the efficiency of tournament angling, keeping that lure as often as possible in the right area in the right cast, with rock pile, like I said. So I can use that to just kind of locate exactly which direction to fire out there, especially in high winds and things like that, or areas I'm not as familiar with. I can't triangulate as quickly because I'm on a new lake or something like that. So that's the second, but for boat positioning and angling. And the third is understanding the environmental factors of what's going on. And I would probably say that the environmental factors are the most important of all three of those. And it's the most overlooked, it's the least talked about. And honestly, I think it's the glue between Randy's opinion of technology and what people see me as the chaser that chases down these giant fish. And there's the glue there of understanding the environmental factors is what we're getting at. If you're an intuitive angler, you cannot leave that portion of you and just own this technology and become a great angler. It is not going to happen. So what I was able to use on Grand, for example, I really focused on what the bait was doing when I was fishing. I covered a lot of work. Now like I said, I'd gone in there on a Tuesday, saw that the water was dirty. What I had also seen was 2 weeks prior, there was a lot of bait that was really high up and was in balls, and there wasn't much current. So a lot of those bait had slid up onto some flats. Well, my mistake in the MPFL was I chased those flats, that bait, thinking that some of the fish were going to do the fall, and they didn't. Okay. But what had happened is a lot of those fish were still in their summer pattern, so they were still on their deeper edges, on their bluff walls, for example. But because the bait was all so high in the water column, a lot of those fish got underneath those docks, and they were using the rails and all those things. And I mean, most of the fish were, I caught a fish on a wake bait 2 weeks prior, because my jerk bait was getting down too low. They were really high because all that bait was really high. So when I noticed that visibly with my eyes, and I confirmed it with my live scope that the bait had broken up more and they'd gone deeper and moved out, they were still a lot more bait in conjunction with the drops, if you will. And when I say that, the deeper in the drops, I'm going to say that, qualify it with this. I did start off on bluff ends because that's where I saw the bait. But as time went on, I used that same deeper spot to go fish what Texas guys would call ditches or drains, like little bitty drops in the flats that went from 6 inches into about 2 foot. Those fish were absolutely right there time because all that bait had kind of congregated in the deeper spots. So that's what I was using that technology for, was to identify, where's the majority of the fish, the bait, where's the majority of the activity that I see, and then just keeping my boat in the highest percentage chances to be around a population of fish. And so from there, we can talk about how I decided to target and fish them. But
and the thing that's interesting about that, and I know that a lot of guys watch my YouTube channel, they see me talking about how I use my electronics to locate fish. And the nice thing about Livescope is basically Livescope a lot of times gives you the ability to graph and fish at the same time. And what I mean by that is you can see out in the creek channel where the bait fish are. And I use Livescope almost exclusively for that. What you said, John, is seeing where the bait fish are, seeing where the different slight undulations or changes in the bank are. Randy, if I kind of relate it to what you might do, let's say you're running down Grand Lake, you might be able to identify that there's a group of shad or something down the bank, depending on where birds are diving, or there's some blue heron. Maybe you see a ball of bait on the surface. You use those environmental clues, where John and like myself, we use Livescope to get those same clues, but under the water with Livescope. So it's a second set of eyes. It's like you can unlock a whole new realm of senses. It's almost like, I think about it, there's two spectrums of your senses. There's the above water senses, which you have refined extremely well, Randy. You know how all the little small factors make the fish react and change the fish. But then there's all these underwater factors that you can gain with Livescope. Now, that's not something that you're just going to be able to pick up overnight either. I know we talk about that all the time, John. You're not just going to put Livescope on your boat and then become John Soukup and go win 2 tournaments and win and lead the Bassmaster Open. You have to have a ton of time on the water to understand, what does bait fish proximity to some cover or structure really mean for the fish. Can you elaborate on that a little bit, John?
Yeah, and I think it's important, once again, to talk about what time of year we're talking about. Right now, we are talking about a fall transition, a summer to fall transition, where fish are just starting to come out of that summer pattern and just starting to do the fall thing. And, some of the things that I've learned over the years is that, fish actually will stage a little bit in the fall when they're not quite ready to do it. And so when you're talking about the proximity, I started out on the bluff ends. That's where I started out. Now, I did start with a buzzbait, because I'm wanting to fish high in the water column. It's a big fish lure in the fall. That's how you win tournaments a lot of times in the falls. Every time I've ever won or done a great in a tournament in the fall, I've had some kind of top water incorporated at some point in a multi-day event. So, that's where I was starting. And, early on, I had a 5-pounder blow up. I started on a spot I'd never even fished before. I knew it was a bluff in. I started there, had a 5-pounder, eat it. It came off like some buzzbait fish do, like it had it sideways in its mouth and not like hooked. And then I caught a 4 just like 15 yards down, and I caught a 2 early on. So that helped me stay with that topwater pattern. So I jumped those bluff ends, and actually my bite started to die. And there was like a big lull all 3 days from like, I don't know if you want to say 9 till about noon. There was just this gigantic lull. You could catch a couple little keepers, but they were typically like 14 inches. I don't think I caught a good one during that lull time any of the 3 days. So what I did do, though, is I started to push up into the flats later in the day, because knowing that in the fall, the baits start to rise and they start to slide up in those flats, I went there as well. Now, when I got up in those flats and I wasn't getting a bit, I could see with my electronics that there was no bait in the flats. So it allowed me to eliminate that really quick. I didn't have to go spend an hour and a half seeing if I was getting. I could blow through an area, and then when I started getting to the drops, that's when I started seeing the bait congregate. And so I realized that the bait were on the drops. There was no need for those bass that were kind of staging to do the fall thing. They're going to stage on that bait. They go up into those flats because that's when they follow the bait. They don't go up there just to suntan. You know what I mean? Like, they're up there chasing that bait. So the bait was in the ditches and the drains, and so that's where I focused. Now, because I was throwing topwater, you have to force or create a reaction bite. Okay, when you're topwater, if they're not feeding, okay, you have to force the reaction, and you're not going to force a reaction topwater bite in 50 foot of water. The fish if he's lazy, he's not going to come up 15 and blow up on the top, not on a dirty Grand Lake, So I fished as shallow as possible, the deepest water as shallow as possible, because I didn't know where I knew the fish were at, but that's where I knew I could, if I bring that buzzbait over the top, I might get one to just look up and get aggravated, and that's why I lost several fish during the tournament too, because they weren't fully hungry. When
you're talking about that, you're probably looking at drops that were going from maybe 2 to 8 foot, maybe, like at the most, like early, like that sort of deep water.
No,
it's not like
I'm talking about trolling motor grinding, breaking off the skag of my trolling motor 6 inches as far as you can cast, to where it rolls into like 2 foot, maybe 4 foot. Like, you know what I mean? Like shallow enough that it still forced that fish, if there was one right on that drop, that it would actually come up and go ahead and, get aggravated for a second.
So, and this is something I talk about all the time, because this is something I always say, deep water is very relative. So for you, deep water in that scenario was 2 feet, and shallow water was 6 inches. Where most people, when they think deep water, they think 20 feet, and you're maybe fishing a drop that goes from 15 to 20 feet. But like, those drops are just as effective. The drops from 6 inches to 2 feet. So yeah, that's something that I talk about all the time too. That's interesting. Okay. This is super interesting, John. I love this conversation. Well, I'll take this offline with you because everyone is really anxious for this battle.
Okay.
They're ready for it. So I'm going to set the mood here. Before we get into the battle, one more quick shout out to Bridgford for sponsoring the podcast. We have our winner, Ryan Varner, this week. Send us an email at info@fishingmoment.com, winning a free case of Bridgford beef jerky, 12 free packages. And then huge shout out to the Bass Tank as well for sponsoring this week's podcast as well, or for sponsoring the podcast all the time. John is one of the owners over there. So John, thanks for all the support here on Fish the Moment live stream and the podcast. Okay. So I'm going to actually get my face out of here because you guys don't need me clogging up the let me get myself out of here. You don't need me clogging up any of the room. Okay. So we got that. Good deal. Oh, I need to get this other thing out of here. Give me a second.
Is this when Randy comes out and actually tells everybody how much he loves Livescope? Is this?
Yeah, and he's actually been running it for the past 6 months incognito.
He's just trying to detour the other fishermen.
I would lose half my subscribers to my channel if I did that.
Okay, so guys, I'm going to give you a little intro for this battle. Do it a little bit WWE style. So I got to get some intros for you guys, and then we'll let the battle commence. On the right side, the Livescope Master, hailing from Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Okay.
Rumor says he offered Livescope to the captain of the Titanic to help detect icebergs. However, he declined the offer because he said that was cheating. Another source claimed he spent a third of his tournament winnings this year at his chiropractor to fix the pain in his neck from staring down at Livescope all day. Here to defend Livescope for the entire fishing community, John Hookup Soukup.
Yeah, there we go.
Okay, next up, on the left side, the world's first and only nude bass fishing model, hailing from Springfield, Missouri. Legend says he spent 18 months in secluded mountains with native Ozark gurus to train his eyes to see 10 feet deep in the water with only 1 foot of water visibility. Unfortunately, the skill is now useless with the introduction of Livescope. Now we know why he hates it. He also recently earned a Guinness Book of World Record for the most YouTube videos about Livescope, despite not owning one. Here to defend all anglers who want Livescope banned and erased from bass fishing history, Randy, I still use a flasher, Blaukat.
That's great.
Getting the guns. Okay, there we go. Guys, so let's get into it. First, I want to get your opinion on this topic, and then I want it to kind of flow from here. But I'm going to start with you, John, because everyone knows Randy's opinion here, but I'll get Randy's opinion as well. But John, what do you think the impact of Livescope has been on bass fishing? We can maybe say tournament bass fishing, recreational bass fishing, anything. What has been the impact of Livescope? Has it been good, bad? Has it made everyone the best angler in the world? Is it making fishermen worse? What is your thoughts on how Livescope has affected bass fishing over the past couple of years?
Yeah, I think you'd have to segment that into tournament fishermen, recreational fishermen, all everything. I think it's had an overall good impact. I think it's been able to take a lot of fishermen who need to see the full picture to understand the environmental factors of bass. Some guys can't get A plus B. They got to see the whole formula before they get it and understand it. And that's one of the things, like when Jonny's talking about teaching the behaviors of fish and the patterns of fish and things like that, that to be able to have those eyes in the water to see what fish are actually doing and to explain why they're doing it, I think for the recreation fishermen, I think it's beneficial to them. They don't have the thousands of hours that they can to get on the water to maybe create this understanding themselves. So it helps them. It definitely helps them. Just like the invention of the internet and social media and things like that help people learn faster. It's just another one of those tools on that side. On the tournament side of things, man, I think it's been a lot like an A-rig, and it's opened up the opportunity to catch fish that typically would not have been caught at certain times a year. Not always, because I also think there's a lot of guys that put it on their boat. They spend the money. They think they know it. Typical arrogant fishermen think they know everything, and they really don't even know how to use it. So they haven't even maxed it out to what its potential really could be for them at times. So I don't know if I'm missing anything there, Jonny, but
no, that's good. So overall positive.
Overall. Yeah.
overall positive for the industry. Okay, Randy, let's get your rebuttal, your take. What has Livescope done to the bass fishing industry over the past couple of years?
Well, first I want to say that I have always not been a dinosaur with technology. I remember back in the late 80s, I caught a bunch of flack from the guys because I was like one of the first pros out there to have 4 flashers on the boat. I had 2 in-dash flashers and I had 2 gimbal mounted ones. And I did that in case one broke down. And I had guys saying, man, why do you need 4 flashers on your boat? So, I was cutting edge at one point, I went backwards. But here's my viewpoint on the deal. I have there's no debate out there that Livescope is going to make you a better angler. It's going to put you in the position where you can catch more fish if you use it correctly, and you're going to catch fish that you didn't even know that was there before. I have guys message me all the time on my YouTube channel saying you're going to get left behind, you're going to get in the dust, you need to get up with the times. I get that. I understand the fact that I'm going to sacrifice my tournament performance in some events by not using Livescope. I understand that. My point with Livescope is twofold. Number one, I'm more of a purist, or I've become more of a purist in the sport, and I'm looking at Livescope in the terms of what it's doing to the intrinsic value of what fishing offers us, as far as that ability to reconnect with nature and the more primal elements of fishing. And as technology advances and it continues to advance, my big concern is that intrinsic value and the properties that initially attracted so many people to fishing to begin with, it starts to go away. That's the first basic premise. The second premise is the cost of it. And, just like John was saying with the bass tank, he can set up, he can set up a system for any price point out there. But when you're talking about having to compete against other anglers that have Livescope on there, you sort of create some type of an unfair playing field for anglers that can't afford it. I was at the Bass Open we fished at Lake Louisville last year. There was this one dude up there. He had a brand new Ranger. He had 3 big units on the console. He had 3 up front, $20-some thousand worth of electronics on the boat probably. And, then you'll have some guys on there that have they have 2 little 9-inch units on there. So from that standpoint, you create an unfair playing field under some situations for anglers that simply can't afford that technology. So that's my basic approach to it. There is no debate on the fact that Livescope you're going to catch more fish with it. There's no doubt it's a piece of technology that you're going to have if you're going to win tournaments consistently and place high. But I always pull back to the fact that I'm looking at the big picture down the road 50 years from now. And one of the questions I'm curious to pose to John tonight is, because John's an exception here. He's obviously he has a lot of primal skills that he incorporates with the technology, and that's impressive to me, because it's just like at the Grand Lake tournament. He was fishing the current conditions at the time and caught 20 pounds, and I caught 10 pounds the first day of the tournament, fishing nothing but old, my old stomping ground spots, just places where I knew they were before. That's the difference. But the question I'd like to pose to John here at some point, but you don't have to answer it now, John, but at some point, at what point in the tournament realm do we say, okay, guys, the technology is advancing so far that we have got to pull it back a little bit? I mean, at what point, when somebody develops some type of a system that actually allows you to see every fish in the water down there, where it takes every bit of mystery out of fishing, at what point does technology advance to the point where we have to say, okay, we got to rein it back in a little bit? I mean, or is there a point when that happens?
Yeah, I think I can answer that right away. I think there probably will be a point, you know what I mean? Especially at the highest of levels, right? I don't think we've reached it there myself, but this is just a personal opinion. I think that whatever the new technology or the new rage is, I don't want to be the guys that makes it as an excuse for people to not continue to battle with figuring out the fish. And I'm going to give you an example, right? It was not that long ago in my life, maybe it's been up to 15 years ago, okay? So I'd have to do the math, where I didn't own a boat, period. I didn't own I didn't own anything. And I didn't have the money for it. And so, but I wanted to fish. I wanted to get back into fishing. My first word was fish. I'd gone a long time without fishing. So I took what little rod I had and I went and sat on a bench, and I'd sit there at the local jackpots, and I'd hope and I'd pray that someone came by without a partner, needed a partner to fish, right? And that's how I got myself back into fishing. And fortunately now I'm at a point now where I own what would be considered a tech company, in the fishing world. So I've come a long ways, but it was because of that no quit, no excuse. Like, there's a lot of guys out there, and so if like someone is anti technology, that's fine if they're anti Livescope, but don't use that as a reason to quit your tournament dreams. I see a lot of guys saying, "Well, that's why I pulled out of these tournaments, because I can't compete." And honestly, I mean, maybe I'll make some enemies with this. I don't mean to say this, but if you're pulling out and quitting because you don't have a Livescope, you're actually just quitting because you don't have the determination it takes to love the fishing like you think that you need. Because I've been there, and I've got lots of friends that have been there that have come from nothing and competed with guys that had bigger, badder boats, bigger, badder trucks, bigger, badder technology in all sorts of realms. So I think that the question that you propose opens up to, potentially a lot of other categories, right? That's how I visually see it. Now, when we're specifically talking about Livescope, and to answer the question directly, listen, if we got to a point where you could see everything in the world that was there, it would probably be time for us to take into consideration, what were you doing at the highest level of tournaments.
So another question for you guys that I wanted to pose to both of you. When you're using Livescope, and this is kind of, I want to pose this question to you, John, and then kick it over to Randy. But how much time would you think it would take an average angler, John, to actually get proficient at using Livescope to help them become a better angler, to like actually know what they're looking at and understand it and all of that, versus just learning how to read side imaging, down imaging, tube D sonar? Because that's something that I hear from a lot of guys, is that they don't want to take the time, the average angler doesn't want to take the time to learn the old types of sonar. They want to get Livescope because it's easier to understand, it's easier to comprehend, and they just want to get that quick ticket. So for a new angler, maybe if they can buy Livescope at $2,000, they can get a big head start over a new angler who maybe can't spend but $500 on a hook unit or whatever.
Right. I think, listen, if we were talking about crappie fishing, I've competed in the crappie realm in tournaments. I think it's a completely different conversation, okay? Because you can dominate the crappie world overnight with Livescope. But what you can't do with Livescope in the bass world is you can't evaluate a 60-mile stretch of a river. You can't do it. Like, there's just mathematically, it's just, you don't have enough time. So you have to use your big motor, forget electronics, just your eyes and driving up and down the lake and looking at whether you're seeing current breaks or whether you're seeing, muddy water, stained water, clear water, and all those things that you visibly see with your eyes. You have to have a better boat than somebody else. There's some guys out there that don't have that can't travel that far. They've made big risks to enter tournaments. They don't have, so they have to stay close to the ramp. Like, some guys' gas tanks don't carry as much gas. So there's things of that nature. So from that point, then you go into your down imaging, your side imaging, and you're actually graphing and being able to cover large amounts of waters to study whether you're finding brush piles, rock piles, ledges, fish, bait, et cetera, et cetera. And then from there, there are certain times when you use your 2D on plane, like if you're looking for grass and things like that. If you're on pad, you can pick up grass and things like that, or bait, a lot of times. But when you slow down and get up on the trolling motor, that's when your Livescope and your 2D sonar, for me personally, come into a lot more effect. I honestly, on Garmin, they've got a thing called an A-scope, which it's just essentially it's just the old flasher. When I'm going any vertical anymore, I will have my Livescope running, but I'm actually not looking at my Livescope. I'm actually looking at my 2D, and more specifically, I'm looking at that flasher, the A-scope on my 2D, because it has the fastest return out of anything that exists still. The old technology still has the fastest blip. And so that's when, if I'm dropping a spoon, or a drop shot. So after all, it's funny because out of all the technology in the world, sometimes the most deadly technology is still the old school technology of that older flasher. So
That's awesome. So Randy, I want to bring a question to you then, because this is something that I kind of hear you talk about too, and I want to get your opinion. And I want to get John's opinion as well. So I feel like you feel like when you're fishing the Bassmaster Opens and stuff, you're at a disadvantage because you don't have live scope. You're at a strict disadvantage. How much of a disadvantage do you think it is to the point where, let's say that you took an average BFL angler, a guy who fishes weekend tournaments, decent anglers, got a boat, not going to make the Elite Series, not going to be like the best guy in the world, and then you put him against a guy on the Bassmaster Elite Series. You give one of them a boat fully rigged up with all the electronics, all the live scope, all that stuff, and you give an Elite Series guy a boat with nothing, just a trolling motor and an engine. Do you think that the live scope and all of them gives them enough advantage to beat an Elite Series guy just by getting the technology, just by having the technology on their boat? Maybe they can learn to use it for a week or whatever, but does that having technology bridge the skill gap for you? Do you feel like that's true for Randy?
Well, I think there's two parts to that question. I think the first part is like it depends on the lake you're on, and it also depends on how proficient you are with the unit. If you're fishing, some of the northern lakes like Lake St. Clair and those big smallmouth lakes up there, you can't hardly win without that anymore. When you get in a situation where the fish are set up and they're suspended in a certain position, you're fishing. If you're not using that technology against people that know how to use it, you just can't win with it. And then there'll be some situations where it's completely irrelevant. I mean, if you're flipping flooded willow trees and 2 foot of water, yeah, there's probably some guys that understand it like John that can see fish in there, but for the most part, that's not going to be a factor with that. And again, it depends on how well anglers know how to use it. Jonny and I, we've been in the boat together, and I've seen what you can do with a live scope, and I see how you can interpret it. But like when when I was guiding at Table Rock a lot last winter, and I'll be doing it the same this winter, I'm the only dude up on the bank in the wintertime throwing a jerkbait. Everybody else is out in the middle of a creek and over 70 foot of water looking down at a live scope. Literally, I don't see anybody fishing. Everybody's looking. And a lot of those guys aren't catching them. They're out there fishing with that live scope because they've heard that they need to use live scope, and they wind up getting out there and they get frustrated and they don't catch them. So a lot of it depends on how good you are with that, I think.
Yeah, and I think that connects into that question that you posed earlier, is like how long. I think it's going to take the average guy at least a year to get really decent with his live scope. Now, when you're talking about environmental factors, I think you can plug it in, put it in the water, and if you have a standard understanding of bait behavior, fish behavior, just a standard one. And what I mean by this is there's a lot of times guys will ask me, well, how do you know the difference between a sand bass and a bass? Well, if you close your eyes right now and just imagine how they school, because you've seen it 1,000 times right over the years, right? You're already going to understand what the difference between a sand bass looks versus a bass. So if that guy doesn't already understand that, he's got a long way to go, because he's going to have to catch a few of those several times to say, oh, wait a minute, that's sand bass, not bass. So those are some examples. But probably to get to, unless you get someone to train you and work with you to get really super deadly and proficient, it's going to take at least a year to up to 3 years, probably, for some guys. And a lot of that has to do with even a guy's physical balance. We have a lot of, and especially we got a lot of customers that are crappie fishermen, so a lot of them are baby boomers, right? They're not bass fishing anymore because they don't have the ability to stand on a trolling motor all day long. You know what I mean? They got to sit in a chair. They got their live scope, but they got it on a pole mount, so they can just move around. And to be honest with you, that is one of the things that I think does bring a lot of joy to the fishing that the technology has done. It's given these guys that have spent their entire life saving up to be able to retire. They finally retire, and because we can all complain about how hard the world is nowadays, right? They don't have that many years left in their life. They saved up their entire life so they could finally go out and buy a boat and finally go fishing. And they only have about 5 to 10 years left to physically do that. And they're ready to catch fish now instead of using that 3 to 5 years to find fish. And so that's where that technology does help you out. Or like with an older grandpa wanting to take, grandkids out and go to a brush pile and just catch bluegill, to identify which brush pile has bluegill, and so they don't go out and waste the entire day on the brush pile without bluegill. That's where most of our customers come from, and that's where actually the love for the technology and where we get the hashtag catching not fishing comes from, is helping people get around an environment where they can actually catch more fish.
Deal. Another question for you guys, one I think is not happening right now, but in the future, do you guys foresee a time, let's say in 5 years, 10 years, and some people think I'm already here, I'm not, but people think this about me, is do you think there's going to be pro fishermen in 5 years, if Livescope is allowed to be in tournaments for the next 5 years, who literally could only compete in tournaments because they have Livescope? If you took Livescope away from them, they would not know how to fish, because they, especially people who are right now 15, 16 years old. I know when I was fishing when I was 15, 16 years old, I had to learn how to fish without electronics. Then I had to learn how to fish with 2D sonar, like black and white 2D sonar. I went through the whole progression there. I didn't go flasher, but I was pretty close there, and that helped me learn a lot. But now some of these guys that are growing up, they start with Livescope, and they're looking at it, and that's all they do. And do you think there's going to get to a point where people are just not able to, guys are just not able to just fish? They have to have Livescope, and if they don't have it, they just can't catch them. Do you think that's going to get to a point in fishing where that would happen?
Yeah, I absolutely do not think when we're talking about a national tour trail that is possible at all. That will never, ever happen. I think the guys that are really, really, really good with the technology will understand and say the exact same thing. I think those that haven't used it as much and have just seen like the most shiny, powerful part of it, think that's not what happens every single day. There is too many days out of the year, too many situations where if they're relying on that technology, they will absolutely fail and crush. Now, can a regional or a local-based region where, I don't know, I'm thinking like you talking about the St. Clairs, or maybe like a Hartwell at certain times of year where they're out there chasing bait or something of that nature, could that guy? But not on a national tour level. Not going to happen.
What are your thoughts, Randy?
Yeah, I would agree to that as far as competing on a national level. I think that you could have some individual anglers that fall into the trap. For example, I'll use David Fritz, for example. David Fritz is so singly focused on, or he was back in his heyday, but at the top of his game back in the 90s, was so focused on deep cranking and crankbait fishing that he would dominate literally in a couple tournaments a year. And then every other tournament of the year, he wouldn't catch anything, but he would be so dominant in those 2 to 3 tournaments where they're biting it a year that, he could compete. It's sort of the same with the Livescope. I can see some guys that get so locked into it, so in tune with it, have so much confidence in it, open a couple tournaments and they're going to crash and burn the rest of it. Yeah, you can't. It'd be very difficult to qualify for championships consistently if you just stayed with that completely and look for those type of fish all the time.
That's super interesting. Well, I was thinking there's going to be more conflict here. You guys not on the same page. It sounds like you guys are very much on the same page. Really, the only difference here, honestly, Randy, is just the price point for you.
Okay, I've got a couple more potentially conflict.
There we go. Bring the drama, here. Randy. That's what we've been waiting for.
I got a couple things I want to pose to John here. Okay, now a lot of it is that this, and I'm looking at this from a tournament realm, from a tournament perspective with the Livescope. The recreational end of it, not so much. I would say that probably the majority of the listeners on Fish the Moment, or the viewers, they fish tournaments to some extent, club tournaments or whatever. But okay, if technology continues to advance in the trajectory that we are right now with electronic technology, and if you look where we were, 30 years ago, and look where we are now with electronic technology, let's put another 30 years on top of that, and we sort of get a picture on what the potential is for the technology 30 years from now. My point is, let me use the example I've used before with golf. Let's say somebody invented a putter that had the capabilities of sinking every single putt that you had on the green. There was something about this putter, the way it lined up, that you could sink every putt every single time. And let's say the thing cost $200,000, but you couldn't win without it. It was impossible to win without it. I see, in my own opinion, the way that as good as we are with technology and the advances we have in that area, I see at the point, at some point down the road, it could be 10 years from now, it could be 50 years from now, whatever, where we have that technology where it simply takes every bit of mystery, every bit of guesswork. You can find the fish, you can find the fish that are active, and we may not even be able to picture what that's like in our mind, but at some point it's going to be there. Why would it be okay to allow that putter to be used in the PGA Tour the same way? Would it be legal in tournament fishing to allow some type of technology that took every bit of guesswork out of fishing? You put it in there, it takes you to point A, points B, identifies the size of the bass, the species, the mood that they're in, the angle of cast you need to make. At what point is that going to manifest? And if that happens, what do we do about it?
Yeah, I think that possibly that's going to happen at some point down the road. I mean, especially if you're looking at the fact that Panoptics has been out for a decade. It just hasn't been. It took till about 4 years ago for people to like start really adopting it, use it when Livescope actually came out. It was so much better to use Livescope than the original Panoptics, technology. So, and we know how the bell curve of technology works, right? It's not going to take what we advanced in 30 years. It's not going to take another 30 years to get there. I mean, beyond it's going to go a lot faster. As the companies compete with each other and stuff like that. So yeah, I think there is going to be a point in time when it needs to be evaluated on that tournament scene. But I think that I don't think we're there yet. I don't know if we're a decade away. I really don't know. But because I have a little bit of that purist in me as well. But to be fair to both of us, we're not out there in a creek in Colorado fly fishing. Like those guys are extreme purists, and I'm fascinated by those guys. But I'm not that guy. I want to still fire up the 250, and please make that thing 300. Like get our let us put 300s on our boat. Like that's kind of how I am. I mean, I know there's a part that's not safe, and I think that it's the same comparison, right? Like I want to learn as much as I can about the fish as possible, and that's where I've fallen in love with the technology. And as I've learned more about the fish, utilizing that technology, and it's confirmed theories, and just when I was growing up as a kid, Roland Martin's 101 Bass Catching Secrets, it was literally my Bible. I could quote that. Like, I still think I could quote like part of like the 9 reasons bass bite. Like, I can remember all these things, but I didn't have any real life experience, right? I had all this knowledge in my head. And as the years have gone, I had more time to get on the water, and I've been able to put those things in practice. I've been able to prove things and take things away. And that's what the technology has done for me. It's allowed me to become more of an intuitive angler, I feel like. Not less of one, actually more of one. At times and moments, no, because I was forcing the technology too far. So that's why I fell in love with it so much. If we get to the point where we can just turn on the units and we can be Kevin Van Dam because we have a unit turned on, I think we've gone too far in allowing it in tournament fishing. And I hope that we don't ever get to that point where we allow that in tournament fishing. And we'll probably have to get to that point, and then we'll have to probably take an angler vote and back it off for us to get there. I see what you're saying as far as saying, whoa, slow this down. I don't want this to get to this point. I don't think we're going to be able to bark loud enough for it to stop. They're going to sell too much. They make their money on the recreation side. They're not making the money off us tournament English. They're making it off, at the high level tournament English. When I say they, the Garmins, the Lawrences, the Humminbirds, they're making it off of the other fishermen out there that are just buying it. They're going to buy it. So it would be up to the tournaments to make that decision of, hey, you shouldn't be able to just push a button and turn into Kevin Van Dam. We are long ways away from it. I know people have a lot of fear that that's where we're at, but I'm here to tell you right now, yes, I sell electronics. Yes, I sell Livescope. Yes, we say we're the forward-facing pioneers, and yes, I train people on it. I won one tournament this year because of the Livescope. That was the first one. The second one completely was not because of Livescope. It did help me in some environmental fashion, but I was just doing old school flipping, throwing a frog some. And yes, at the Open, when they asked me what I was doing, I told them in the interview that I had my Livescope on all day long because I wanted the other 200 people to think I was out in the middle of the lake Livescoping when I was fishing this deep. That's what you do as a tournament fisherman, right? So I would actually turn the question around to you, Randy, and ask you this in return. At what point in time, while all of us goofballs are out in the middle doing circles, chasing fish that we can't catch, does the bank fishing that you love to do become the new offshore where you gain the advantage again because you have that skill set to fish the bank when other guys, they literally spent their entire childhood trying to chase fish offshore technology, and they can't even make the flip that you can make. They can't make that pitch. They can't read the bank like you can reach. Do you feel like you've already been able to see that, or do you think that's coming?
No, I think on certain lakes that's, bass evolve quickly. I mean, they learn quickly, they adapt quickly. And I think on certain lakes, that's a definite possibility where you get, say, for example, like lakes like Table Rock, where you got everybody, at certain times of the year using that live scope. I can see how those fish can react to that at some point. And yeah, since people aren't fishing the bank as much, that type of fishing can be competitive with live scope. That's definitely a possibility on there. Back to your earlier point, which about the tournament directors, one of the things that I'm concerned about that is that as long as the money is there, as long as the electronics company are making money, as long as the electronic companies are subsidizing and supporting the tournaments, I don't see them ever reeling back in on those the expansion in that technology. So here's sort of my stance on the thing. If that's the direction that we're headed, and it's just, okay, we're all in with this, whatever goes, there's nothing off the table, as long as they're, sponsoring the tournament circuits, you guys develop whatever you want, then why don't they take the cuffs off anglers like myself and get rid of those rules that say you can't get out of your boat to push off a sand flat? You can't, drag your boat across with a winch over a shallow area. Why can't I hire a helicopter and lift my boat, 50 yards over 2 inches of water to get in another part of the creek? Why can't I put gas in my boat if I want to make a 150-mile run? My point would be, take those rules off the low-tech anglers and, apply the same thing to the high-tech anglers, because it's okay to have $20,000 worth of electronics in your boat, but it's illegal for me to get out of my boat and pull my boat over a mud flat. So that's sort of from a tournament standpoint with the tournament directors, that's sort of the hypocrisy that I see. And, I know I sort of got away from your point there, but that's
I don't think there's hypocrisy there. What I think there is I think it's a simple answer. I think it's all insurance based. We're not able to do some of those things just because of legalities of insurance. They don't want people, doing the things that you're talking about. They give it free rein, and someone does hire a crane, and then the crane falls, and then they kill somebody, and I think that's where those rules come in effect. They're not planning gas tank, extra gas tanks in the woods. It's all insurance. It has nothing to do with this side of it. So that's just a different conversation in my mind. I think it would be cool to allow for I love the jet boat ideas and stuff like that. I don't like the fact that they pulled those rules out, and stuff like that. We have to use the same boat throughout the season. I don't personally like that. I think it's cool when guys win a tournament on a jet, because they completely handicapped themselves in one case, right? Like, they're all in on that. If they go back in that area and they're not there, it's not like they have time to just go run all over the lake or whatever. So those guys that have done that and won past tournaments with, like a jet boat, for example, I think it's really cool.
Okay, well, and Randy, real quick, I want to keep us on track for Livescope, because I know we could go to a whole conversation about that. And I've heard we've talked about it before on the channel, but this we don't have too much more time here, so I want to keep us on track. And you guys are not controversial at all right now. You're not throat, so I need you guys to take the gloves off. And I've been saving this question in case you guys were too nice, which you guys are both super nice guys. And I knew that this was going to happen, because I knew once you guys got together, you would agree more than disagree. But I got to throw this question out. I'm pulling the gloves, throwing the hard right hook. There are guys out there, and I want to get both your opinions on this, that say that Livescope is cheating. Just go read the comments of any of Randy's YouTube videos. You will get plenty of comments. Any of his Livescope videos. He has like 7,600. I think that's what the Guinness Book of World Records said. But he had a lot of YouTube videos about it. They say Livescope is cheating. It's basically like sight fishing year-round, where you just look at the fish, you catch them. It takes no skill, because you can just go out there, look at the fish, and catch them. It takes all the skill out of bass fishing, and it's cheating. What is your response to that? Let's start with you, Randy, because I know what John's going to be. But Randy, what do you say to the whole? It's cheating. It's like sight fishing. It's no skill, useless.
It's not cheating if tournament directors make it legal. So I mean, from that standpoint, so you have to toss it back into the tournament director's realm there. But
what about from the ethical standpoint? Maybe not tournament directors, but is it like sight fishing year round?
Well, it's not even. I don't even feel like it's an ethical point. There's two things that I'll address on that. I agree with what John said, that you can't just turn the live scope on and expect to catch fish. There's too many things on there that take a lot of time on the water to understand how to utilize it effectively. It's the same with a 2D flasher. I mean, if you don't understand how to use a 2D flasher and how to set the thing properly, and you don't know what you're looking at, you're not going to get the most out of it. But it's not, from my standpoint, I don't consider it cheating in a tournament. I just consider it taking away from what is really the attraction of fishing. Because when I take it back to like when I was wading creeks when I was 10 years old, it's like there's elements in fishing that have a therapeutic healing property to it that you can't understand unless you've been in that environment. Unless a lot of these kids out there that have they started fishing in their dad's $80,000 bass boat, and they weren't wading creeks like I was, or getting my feet muddy wading ponds when you're 10 years old. You're disconnected from the power of nature and that reality of the properties that nature gives you through fishing. To me, that is that's why I fish. That's the value of fishing. And the conversation, once it turns into the high-tech realm, and that it takes away from that. And I see that as sort of a tragedy in our sport. You can argue the point when you're talking just about hardcore fishing, if live scope is an advantage or not advantage, but it's the same thing what I'm saying about commercial fishing. Do we want bass fishing to turn into a commercial venture, or basically we go out there and we become so adept at catching the fish through technology that there's no challenge beyond utilizing that technology? Yeah, there's some things that can make you better with that technology, but ultimately it becomes more of a commercial venture over a recreational venture that has all this magic and mystery and wonderment in it. I mean, to me, one of the most powerful things about fishing is the unknown. It's like you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what's going to go on. You don't know where those fish are. It's a guessing game before you go fishing. And when you start to utilize the technology like Livescope and some of the stuff we have now, even GPS mapping, it just takes the mystery away. That mystery gets chipped away at a little bit year by year by year. And I just don't like the direction that's headed. That's sort of my point on it.
Yeah, so I think everything that whether it's faith or whether it's politics or whatever, it seems like people always want to they feel like there's only one side, right? There's got to be this one right side, and I just really don't think that there is this one right side. So that may be the difference between me and a lot of people. Like I know that Randy's got a lot of different opinions that I don't hold and I don't agree with, and maybe even would make me upset if you said them vocally, and I probably do as well, right? So, but the problem that we have with society as a whole today is that we can't figure out how to get along with each other, right? We got to have to have this kind of confrontation, this fight about everything, and I don't think it needs to be that way. So, as Randy's saying this, I'm going to tell you guys, there is times when I'm out fishing, my boy, he hates live scoping with me, hates it. There's been times, and especially when I first started the company, and I was really having to train myself. So every time I went out, it wasn't fun fishing. It was, we're going out for a purpose to train. My boy quit fishing as much, right? So I had to tell him, hey man, we're going no electronics today. And he's like, really? And he'd get excited. And he's like, yes, we get to break out the Cinco and the chatterbait and we can just go to the bank. And I'm that way too. Sometimes, man, I'm just today it's all off. And I bring out that side of me that is exactly like Randy said, the wonderment, the amazement. I'm what you'd say, smell the roses, right? I'm breathing it all in. I'm enjoying the fact that hey, am I in 6 feet or am I in 6 inches? I don't know what I'm enjoying all that stuff right now. I'm paying a little bit more. Now I'm paying a little bit more attention to the stumps. Oh wait a minute, that stumps. Here's a roll of bigger stumps. So I must be near a creek channel, right? Like these thinner sticks. Oh, I'm up in shallow water. So I'm picking up all these little things, right? And I'm enjoying that part of life. But here's where we differ a little bit. When we're keeping it in the tournament realm, there is a lot of things, not just fishing electronics, that I can say takes it away from just the recreation fun. If I'm going to just have recreation fun, the reason why I tournament fish and it's fun for me is because I love competition. I'm a competitor, and it gives me that competitive, but it also pushes me. I'm competitive also with the fish, not just with human beings, right? With the fish, and it pushes me to the highest level of figuring out those fish. I can go out and have a decent day on the water in a tournament and come in and get whooped, and I'll go home. I'm like, I'm frustrated. Like, I didn't figure them out like I thought I could figure them out, right? And that's what competition does for me. And so that is not, to me, that may be my personal recreation, right? Where other person's personal recreation is they enjoy the scenery, they enjoy just being on the water, they enjoy the sunrises, they enjoy that stuff, right? And they're not wrong in their opinion, and I'm not wrong in my opinion. We can all kind of coexist, but the difference is when we're talking about tournaments, I don't think that we can have the conversation about it taking purity away from the recreation of fishing, because I don't think that those two actually line up when you get to the head of being the best in the world at being a bass fisherman. I think there is some, you ask any tournament angler that's traveled for a long time, at some point in time, they get a little bit of burnout. It's because they're getting pushed out of what they actually enjoy doing. And that's what the tournament angling, it just, that's what it does to you.
Yeah, I agree. The tournament realm is a completely different environment, but I would go back as a comparison to other sports. I mean, every other sport out there they've set in place equipment regulations to sort of protect the integrity of the sport. It's just like, if that's the case, why don't they allow people to use, pine tar on bats and cork the bats? They have equipment specifications that are designed to, just to keep it the status quo. And I don't see that in bass fishing. I don't see the equipment limitations like there are in bowling and, tennis and, football, whatever. I mean, the weight of football. Bass fishing, it just seems to be, anything goes. There's no limitation on that a little bit.
Yeah, so I agree with you, everything you just said there. And I'm going to throw something in some experience that I've seen. I think that if we had here's the demarcation line, right? Here's Randy's demarcation line is right now. Like, we've hit that with technology. Like, and mine is down the road where we said if you could push a button and become Kevin Van Dam, then you cross that line. Like, we have a big gap there between our two feelings and where. But so here's something interesting, you guys. In the crappie world, they were dealing with the same issue a lot faster than we were. Okay, because it's so much more dominant in the crappie world. All right, and because it's so much more dominant, some clubs decided they were going to have two divisions. They were going to have no live scope division and a live scope division. And you guys, like, they had to almost quit doing the no live scope division because everybody went out and bought a live scope. So it's funny, like, you can offer that right now. You can start a bass trail that says a no live scope bass trail, but I truly believe your participation is going to be way less. The majority of people are going to go ahead and get live scope because they enjoy what allows them to see and understand about fishing.
Yeah, that I guess that'd be unless there was a big money non-live scope circuit. If you have my fantasy in bass fishing is to get some billionaire that would throw, like, millions of dollars into a tournament circuit, and the only thing you can have is like one rod and reel. You can have a 10-horse motor, a trolling motor, and no depth finders, and you fish for $1 million every tournament. So, and that's probably not going to happen, though.
Yeah, and I will say, to address a comment that you made earlier about as long as the tech companies are the ones putting money into it, and so, okay, that's what I feel like would be a negative approach to it. But here's what I think is a positive approach to it. At least somebody's putting money in the economics into the fishing industry right now. Like, so many people are pulling it away from the anglers and tournament trails and things like that. So the intrigue that the technology has created has actually created a lot more fishermen, which in turn has also created these companies to put more money in towards the trails, which gives us all more opportunity, especially as professional fishermen, to actually make a living in fishing. So maybe it's not the hand that we want to get fed by right now, but it's doing what we need economically to create more opportunities in the fishing world.
That's really good stuff, guys. I'm going to interject in here really quick, and I think that was a great discussion there. Finally got you guys rolling. One thing I do want to throw at you or one thing I just want to talk about, and I see this a lot, and it does frustrate me at times, is I hear people saying that Livescope is cheating. It takes no skill to use Livescope. And I think you've heard here from Randy and from John that Livescope isn't something that you just put on your boat and you automatically become a better fisherman. There's actually a lot of guys that I find become worse fishermen because of Livescope. They chase gar and carp and white bass and crappie all around the lake, and they actually catch fewer fish because their Livescope's on their boat. They just don't want to admit it. And there's a really good comment over here, and I find this true. This might be a hot take, but the comment over here was basically, everyone who says Livescope is cheating has never actually used Livescope. And there's so many guys I feel like out there that have that opinion about Livescope, and they hate it and they don't like it at all. I'm not trying to throw a shot at you here, Randy, because you've seen the light a little bit, I feel like. But if you've never used Livescope before and you've never tried to learn it, or you've never tried to learn fishing electronics at all, it's very easy to say, oh, that technology obviously is cheating. This guy's doing better than me in tournaments because he has Livescope. Or he could just have put more time on the water, understanding bass behavior, movement, stuff like that. And yeah, he put the time in to learn the Livescope, but he's also putting time in on the water, not just to learn Livescope, but to understand bass behavior. Learning Livescope is not mutually exclusive from learning how to fish, how to find structure and cover, how to locate fish. They're all tied together. So for those who say it's cheating and it takes no skill, I would highly encourage you to try Livescope on a friend's boat or something out for like 2 or 3 trips and see if it actually helps you catch 20 or 30 extra fish. Because there's still a bunch of guys who were fishing that Grand Lake Bassmaster Open who all had Livescope on their boat, and like 50th place out of 150 guys was 5 pounds for 2 fish. So if Livescope was that great technology, everyone would be catching 20 pounds every single day. So that's just my soapbox there too. Any comments on that, John or Randy?
Yeah, Johnny, I got a comment. For those that think that Livescope is cheating, listen, a wise man once told me, you haven't tried unless you cheated. So maybe you're just not trying hard enough. I don't know.
That's very true. Randy, any thoughts there?
No, I just, I guess, I'm sort of, ever since I've been a little kid, I've sort of been like anti-progress a little bit, and it goes into Livescope too. I'll use an analogy here in Springfield. There was about 3 or 4 months ago, there was this one little section of it was like an acre of land here in Springfield along a busy street that had like 20 beautiful old growth oak trees in it. I mean, these oak trees were massive. They were like 200 years old. Some dude came in there, bought the property, bulldozed down all of those giant oak trees, and put a gas station there. Some people say, well, that's progress. That, to me, that's not progress. That's going backwards. And that's sort of how I feel about technology a little bit. I mean, John makes great points. I mean, and I agree with a lot of the ones that the points he's made here. But in my purest, more, old school view, I just don't see a lot of time that, advancements in technology is a positive thing in the big picture. I mean, that's just sort of my viewpoint on it. Looking down the road, I'm looking down the road, to what my grandchildren are going to have here, as far as to deal with. So I guess it's just a point of view. I mean, it's you can debate either side of it, but that's just sort of the side that I come from. And just looking from a lot of the comments that we get, I think there's a lot of people that agree with that to some extent.
Okay, well, this was super informative, guys. Really enjoyed it. There's a bunch of questions here, and I know you guys are asking a ton of questions for John and for Randy. John, I might just have to have you back on the podcast just to listen or just to answer questions. Guys are asking your opinions on 360 imaging, a bunch of questions about tournament fishing. We have run long already, guys, so I don't want to hold up John all night. He's got family to get to, and so does Randy. But I did 2 key takeaways I took from this live stream. Number 1, if John says he's catching fish on Livescope, that means he's fishing in 2 foot of water. So just remember that. And also learned that Randy was the first angler in the country to run 4 fish finders in this boat. So he may be the biggest hypocrite on YouTube. That's the 2 things I learned today. Hope you guys enjoyed the intros. Took some time to come up with those, to dig through those facts. Those are facts. For the intros on John and Randy. And guys, I just really appreciate you taking the time to, talk with the audience tonight, kind of go back and forth. And again, John, huge thanks for supporting the Fishing Moment live stream, and congratulations on an amazing year. Hopefully have you back on soon to talk more, because there's a lot of great questions for you, so I know people would enjoy.
We very much appreciate it, man. Enjoyed you, Randy.
Yeah, me too, man.
That was way too civil. I'm a little bit disappointed. I feel like that thumbnail is too clickbaity now. I wanted like gloves off, but it's all good. These two are like two of the nicest guys you'll ever meet. I know Randy has a lot of confrontational clickbaity titles sometimes, but Randy's super chill, John's super chill. We're all really chill over here, so that's how we are. We're just bass fishing nerds. That's all it is at the end of the day. So, appreciate everyone tuning in tonight. Also, if you want to, I almost forgot, for next week's podcast, we're doing a Bridgford giveaway this week. Just let us know what your thoughts are in the comments of this video after it posts to YouTube. Let us know what your thoughts are on Livescope. Do you agree with John's points, Randy's points? What are your points? I just want to hear what you guys have to say. We'll pick one comment from the comment section of the YouTube video to win a free case of Bridgford beef jerky next week on the stream. And Ryan Varner, you won this past week, so email us at info.fishingmoment.com for that. Again, shout out to the Bass Tank for sponsoring this week's podcast, or every week's podcast, and shout out to John for joining us. And guys, have a great weekend, have a great night, and best of luck on the water. See you guys later.